Professional curiosity in social work practice. How to overcome some of the barriers to professional curiosity. Welcome to the 5th presentation about professional curiosity. In this video, we'll be focusing on the barriers to professional curiosity. There is a story about a practitioner who needed to make a home visit because of a concern that had been raised. They knew they had to go, yet they were really scared of going because of previous experiences with that family. They approached the house and knocked lightly. A knock where you want to be able to say you tried, but no one answered the door. Many practitioners can relate to the knock lightly dilemma. Behind it is a fear of confrontation, threat, and violence. For some practitioners, there may be other fears, reminded of things in their own story or reminded about a case in the past that had been traumatic or an upsetting visit. We can tell ourselves that if we are scared, how scared do we think the child is in that family? But we will still feel the fear inside us, a fear that could create a barrier to how we practice. When we think about professional curiosity, it may be useful to allocate these to 2 types. These are conscious and unconscious. A conscious awareness of curiosity means that in that moment of action, we are aware of how curious we are and need to be. In this state of awareness, we can make choices. Most of the time, when we are conscious about being curious, we can take appropriate steps to check things out and to dig deeper. There are other times when we are conscious but decide to ignore the warning signals in our mind. We know we need to ask more questions, yet we choose not to do so. We can imagine some of the reasons why someone would do this. For example, like we discussed earlier, it may be because of fear or intimidation. A common dilemma for some health practitioners, especially mental health, is the fear that pursuing such inquiries undermines their therapeutic relationship with the parents. The concern that in doing so, your other work with them may become difficult in the future. And we can sometimes back this up with a story that these kind of things are what social workers should be doing, not teachers or health visitors. So people are very adept at persuading themselves it's for someone else. So conscious curiosity is something that is within our awareness. The second type is more difficult, being unconscious. When we are unconscious of the need to be curious, we cannot exercise any choices. This unconsciousness around curiosity means that in that moment of action, you have no senses or triggers to assist you. An impossible situation. But you can think of this like a weak muscle that you can exercise to make it stronger. One of the things that can trigger our professional curiosity is our response to indicators. We used an example in a previous video where we discussed signs of abuse. Things like children having secrets, or behaving in a more immature or childlike way, or bedwetting. Once you have this knowledge about indicators, it is something you notice. Someone talks about secrets, and you are immediately attuned to this curious train of thought. So the more we familiarise ourselves with indicators, the more likely it will be that we'll notice them in the future. A good example is disguise compliance. Some of the indicators are that nothing changes for the child. Another is the account of a parent of a child's experience of life varies considerably with that presented by the child. These are quite obvious indicators and something that can be routinely checked, like exercising a muscle. This could stimulate further questions and curiosity in your conversations with the family. Another way of making you much more aware is to pay attention to all your senses and intuition. If we learn to listen with all senses, using frameworks to increase how well we notice things, for example, paying attention to how you feel about what is being discussed, are you getting any bodily sensations? A knot in the stomach, or a feeling of irritation or threat? Don't take these at face value. Think of them as potential early warning signals that you may need to pay more attention. So conscious awareness allows us to make choices about how to respond to situations, to follow curiosity or to ignore it. Most of the time, when we are conscious of our curiosity, we take appropriate steps to check things out and to dig deeper. Other times, we may be unconscious and unaware. Learning more about indicators helps us become more aware of what is happening in the family. If we go back to the Sistine Chapel, you'll remember someone saying, "You missed a bit." The message is that we are curious all the time. We just don't recognise it or talk about it. It is only mentioned when someone thinks, "You missed a bit." It is important to note that when a lack of professional curiosity is cited as a factor in a tragic incident, this does not automatically mean that blame should be apportioned. It is widely recognised that there are many barriers to being professionally curious. These can be structural, relational, or emotional. Examples of structural barrier would be things like practitioners not having the time to get to know people, things like services being understaffed, and those at work covering absent colleagues and operating under pressure, services that are under-resourced, leading to staff believing there is nothing they can offer. Structural barriers could include not enough time being devoted to developing staff skills and knowledge. We mentioned earlier the importance of the knowledge about indicators of abuse. Not all organisations are good at providing staff with training or time to develop their skills. Quality supervision, especially reflective supervision, is important in safely inquiring into the edges, the unease and discomfort of curiosity. Then we have relational barriers, the things that get in the way of creating trusting relationships with families, that collaborative relationship, and of course, the child protection role generates such criticism of families, generating resistance and undermining relationships. We need to work very hard to avoid relational barriers, especially in child protection. Emotional barriers include things like the lack of confidence. For us to move towards unease and discomfort, purposefully we need a degree of confidence and self-belief. That ability to listen fully to the family. How many of us don't give time to active listening, but are rather too focused on what the next question should be? Some other barriers are psychological. One of these is confirmation bias. This is a strong psychological trait. In it, we place more value on information that affirms our existing view. That is, we notice more and place more value on the things that affirm our beliefs and confirm us as individuals. In contrast, we pay less attention to the things that challenge our view of the world. An example is hearing something and immediately feeling the comfort of, that's exactly what I thought they'd say. We need to be careful about how our own personal opinions or values influences our practice. There are few structural fears we have as practitioners. A fear that someone else will look back on our practice and make judgments. One example is the reviewer commenting that a practitioner was not curious enough. This is one of the professional fears that plague practitioners. A fear of missing something through not having been curious enough. Another fear is what is called disguised compliance. The practitioner believes that the family is cooperating with them. However, in reality, that isn't happening. The Baby Peter case was a high-profile example of disguised compliance and missing a bit, and it has put fear into the hearts of workers over getting it wrong. Disguised compliance is where a family member or a carer gives the appearance of cooperating with social services to avoid raising suspicions, to allay professional concerns, and ultimately to reduce professional involvement. We need to remember that some abusive parents will go to extraordinary lengths to deceive practitioners through disguised compliance. The evidence base on disguised compliance is not well developed. However, it is possible to heighten our awareness of it and check out some of the indicators. Guidance and a disguised compliance checklist is available. Some of the main indicators are that regardless of services or efforts, nothing changes for the child. It reminds us to really invest in understanding the child's world. Another indicator is the difference between a parent's account of the child's world compared to what you see or what they tell you. Understanding indicators help us notice when we see parents committing and promising, but they don't follow through. Other ideas for you to consider are optimism and not seeing the whole picture. The first of these is the rule of optimism. That means optimistic and looking at best case rather than worst case scenario. Thinking the best of a family. Oh, I'm sure it will be okay. In this, the practitioner finds a way of rationalising new information or escalating risk despite clear evidence to the contrary. The second is keeping your focus too narrow, not seeing the whole picture. The practitioner only responding to each situation or new risk as a singular or discrete event, rather than assessing the new information within the context of the whole person. You need to look at the cumulative effect of a series of events and information. We see this in serious case reviews, when the whole chronology presents a wider pattern of events that may have not been seen at the time. It is always important to consider things like police reports in the context of everything else you have. Don't process it as an isolated event. Other barriers to professional curiosity: normalisation. This is when you get used to seeing things and become immune to how serious a situation really is. This happens often with low-level neglect. Over time, the worker gets used to how things are in a family, but for the child, the cumulative effects may actually make low-level harm significant harm. Professional deference. This is deferring to a person you consider your superior. It may be someone more senior or someone who has confidence or you feel intimidated by. You don't listen to yourself, but to the opinion of others that you may think know better. Even if they know more, if they aren't familiar with the case, Their knowledge may not be as valuable as you give credit. Your voice is important in addition to the views of others. It should never be muted. Knowing, but not knowing. This is when you jump to a hypothesis or view of something when in reality you do not know enough to reach a definitive position. We see this a lot when time pressure makes us rush to decisions or opinions. Confidence in managing tension. It can be a barrier to curiosity when you avoid experiencing discomfort in relationships. That feeling of avoiding or shying away from conflict, it is important to stand up and be assertive in your role. Dealing with uncertainty. Do we think that professionals should know and be certain all of the time? Most of the time, we are in some degree of uncertainty. There are few facts or truths. We need to be able to hold uncertainty and ambiguity. If we can't, we have practitioners who don't like admitting they don't know. If you avoid saying, "I don't know at the moment," it can result in overconfident practitioners. But in reality, they don't know enough to make such a decision, or otherwise nervous practitioners who don't seem sure what to do or find it difficult to make decisions. Other barriers include poor supervision, where professional curiosity is not encouraged. For example, supervision is superficial, just checking on caseload levels, or whether reports or visits have been done. It doesn't allow time to dig deeper. Complexity and pressure of work. For example, you are rushed everywhere and have to cut corners all the time. Changes of caseworker leading to repeatedly starting again in casework and never deepening the inquiry into what is happening. Fixed thinking, preconceived ideas and values. For example, thinking about our perception of males as abusers and females as victims. It has statistical relevance, but case by case, you should be curious about how your perceptions affect your decisions. If you think females don't abuse, men do, would you be curious to indicators that are red flags for men if displayed by females? What do you think you'd see? The next presentation is the last one in this series. In it, we will concentrate on how we can develop our skills in professional curiosity.